"Wake up, son," were the first words that I heard the next morning as the vile man sat at his work desk, tinkering with some small equipment. "What time is it?" I asked him casually, still excited over last night's realization. "That doesn't really matter," he answered me in a cold, uninterested tone. "Although I do want you well rested and fed before today's work." I gave him a dirty look. "What are you planning now?" "Let me worry about that, son," he said simply, and I growled. "I asked you a damn question, now answer it!" I barked at the man, and his shoulders tensed up as he set his toys back on the desk. "Someone is angry today," he noted, standing up out of his chair. "We'll have to correct that, won't we?" "You won't be correcting anything," I spat at him as he slowly walked towards my cage, completely absent of fear. "Tell me, son," the mad scientist said as he kneeled down to put us at eye level. "What are you going to do with all of this rage?" I was a little taken off guard by his question, despite being able to answer it right away. "I plan on killing you," I told him simply, desperate to make my move. But the time hadn't come yet. I needed him to feel in control of everything, with the all-too-usual smirk that I had grown to loathe. But my father didn't smile, instead closing his eyes as he shook his head. "You poor misguided boy," he said in a grim tone. "That's all you are." I looked him dead in the eyes, and my face was full of hate. "No, you have no idea what I am." "I suppose we'll have to see," was all he said to me as he stood back up and moved towards his work desk once more. My eyes widened as the former surgeon picked up a large knife, smirking at the implication. "What are you doing?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Keep that knife away from this cage." "And you catch on," the man said, his eyes drawn to the blade itself. The smirk on his face was replaced with an expression I only saw on surgical days, when the psychotic freak within him would reveal itself hungry for my anguish. "That's what I always cherish about you, Nathaniel," he continued, taking the slowest steps towards me. "However sharp my surgical knife may be, your mind is sharper. The same goes for your body. Every blade I use is dulled by the time I'm done operating. Then again, I'm sure you've wondered why every blade you see looks new." "Stay the hell away from me," I growled as he once again kneeled before my cage. "I'm warning you." His eyes grew wide with amusement. "You're warning me, eh? What exactly would you do to me if I shoved this knife in your throat?" This was all taking me a little off guard, but nevertheless, I intended on this thing going my way for once. I looked away for only a moment before glaring at him again, only this time I had made up my mind on what to finally say to this man. "I'd kill you," I answered him simply, my lip quivering at the sound of my cold voice. "I'd pull the knife out and put it in the place your heart should be." My father ran a few fingers through his thick, brown beard, smiling at my response like a madman. "I want you to know that when such a day comes," he whispered to me, his eyes meeting my own, "I will be the proudest father on the face of this planet." I gave him a disgusted expression. "You're a lunatic." "Ah, but how else would I know what you're made of, son?" he said with a chuckle. "You're just like me." I could never remember exactly why, but in that moment I was unable to make the move I had rehearsed in my head for all hours of the previous night. It was as if my father's words had temporarily paralyzed me, but more likely it was the fact that I knew he was somewhat correct in his claim. As his son, my genetics carried half of his signature, while his oppressive and brutal parenting skills forced me to inherit his vengeful personality. I was doomed to become what he wanted, what he had been working his entire life for. Even if I killed him now and escaped, he still gets what he wanted. He still wins. "Now, if we're done with this conversation," he began, standing once more as he walked back to the work desk, "we have work to attend to, my son." "No," I whispered, shaking my head as I envisioned the agony of all the surgeries, the experimentations, all of it not acts against God, but against me. "Your work is finished." "That's an interesting statement, son, but hardly one with any truth," he murmured, having taken his eyes off of me so that he could prepare a needle. The fool had no idea what was really coming. In an instant, I grabbed the 2 bars in front of my face and snapped them off of the cage. Before he could take full notice, I broke the rest, causing him to turn around like a scared child. "How can this be?" he gasped, standing back up out of his chair. "Those bars should be charged with enough electricity to knock you unconscious." "They were," I mocked him, crawling out of my wretched cage for the first time in my entire life. "Then how is it that you were free before me?" I immediately straightened myself and groaned as I stretched my arms and legs. Never before this moment had I actually stood on my own 2 feet. The cramped cage never allowed for me to do anything else but lay on the mattress within. I was a little surprised with my average height, having always believed I was rather tall. I held onto the bars and outlasted them, draining all of their electricity. "Who'd have known, am I right?" I replied in a joyous tone, relishing what I was about to do. You must get back in your cage," he insisted, taking a step towards me, but I raised a hand to halt him. "What do you plan to do with that needle in your hand?" I asked him, immediately taking on a dark tone. His eyes grew wide as he looked at the dripping needle and gulped. Nothing, son. You were planning to stick me with it to ensure I lost consciousness," I answered for him, taking a step in his direction. "Then you could simply place me in another cage that you would most likely modify so I couldn't break it." My expression lightened for only a moment. "Surely you don't think that's going to work out for you? Even if you were to succeed, no cage you construct will hold me now." I could see the fear in him as he tried to find his bearing. "Now listen to me, Nathaniel. We need to—" "Shut up!" I barked, jumping towards him. "I don't want to hear any more of your lies." He tried to stab me with the needle, but I grabbed his arm and broke it at the elbow, forcing the bone to stick out at a sickening angle. As he dropped the needle, the man who had caused me more than a decade of suffering was finally falling to his knees before me. His screams weren't as loud or alerting as I had originally hoped, but that was just fine. As I looked down into his pain-filled eyes, I knew we had plenty of time to instill more. "Why are you doing this?" he had the nerve to ask after all of these years. A part of me felt he had asked just to take another dig into me emotionally. "I've kept you locked up in a cage for 15 years with no memory outside this room," I snarled at him, balling up my fists. They would be like hammers against his frail skull. "It was for the safety of your safety," I threw at him. "I've known nothing but torment and agony, faced with accepting that my own flesh and blood is essentially killing me." "Nathaniel," he tried to speak calmly but couldn't. "You know that this isn't what we're doing here." "No," I snorted, standing tall over him. "It's what you're doing." "I've told you countless times what my work has been for," he tried to reason with me. "To avenge our family's honor and ensure that my name as David Grey lasts through the ages." "We aren't a family," I yelled at him, stomping my foot into the steel floor. "You're a heartless man, and I'm an angry lab rat. There's no family between us." "Oh, son," he murmured, looking up into my eyes. "What would your mother think of?" His words were silenced as I punched him square in the face, breaking his nose like glass. He fell on his back in a heap and rolled onto his side to safely cough up blood. "I've never had a mother," I hissed at him, happy to see his beard stained red. "Because you killed her, didn't you?" A few moments passed and I grew furious, grabbing him by the collar. "Tell me!" To my surprise, he let out a soft chuckle, followed by a mouthful of blood he had to spit out. "Nothing gets past a Grey, son," he told me, staring at the floor. "But that was my intention. It was essential that you inherited gifts from both her and me, although her usefulness was done after—" "Monster!" I roared, lifting him off the ground with my superhuman strength. With one easy throw, I sent him across the room to crash into his surgical area, knocking over several of his tools. "Wait!" he choked, trying to get up with little result. "Son, I am no son of yours," I growled in reply, taking quick steps towards him. "And you are not my father." "I'll tell you about her," he bargained, still unable to pull himself off the cold floor. "I'll tell you about Thelina." I stopped, just a few short feet of him, my eyes narrowing as I twitched slightly. "Was that her name?" Yes, he replied softly, rolling over onto his back so that he could see me. "Thelina was special just like you are. Gifted with the power to temporarily absorb energy and use it as her own. She fought alongside a few others like her, the first in an evolutionary line that I believe is going to grow. It is because of that belief that I had to kidnap Thelina and force her to carry my child. You, Nathaniel." I couldn't believe what I just heard, trembling as both misery and hatred poured through me, painting atrocious scenarios in my head. Why? Why would you do that?" I asked him, losing my nerve. "The technology that you've seen for the last 15 years won't be revealed to the world for several decades," he explained, weary from losing too much blood. "That keeps America's enemies far behind us in any potential arms race. There's no telling what the world's going to be like when this technology becomes universal." "What does this have to do with my mother?" I asked with a fuss, kicking an office chair into more equipment. A small fire began when sparks ignited the soft material in the chair. "When I learned about superhumans, I couldn't believe the government wouldn't take them seriously, both as a national threat and a scientific duty to evolve our species. The fools were going to ignore them. Can you believe that, Nathaniel?" he asked me, shaking his head. "I blew the whistle on the whole thing, telling the world that our government had technology that was nearly a century before its time." That was when his shriek startled me, a sign that he was trying to get up once more. "Do you want to know how the educated people of the world took to me revealing such information?" His expression was full of deep disgust. "They called me a nut job, a damn lunatic. My career, my respect, and my life were all gone in an instant because of our government's uncanny ability to cover its tracks. For the next 2 years, I spent my time hiding and searching, hoping to find a metahuman I could experiment on," he continued, his voice becoming frantic. "I was about to give up hope and call it quits when I found her, the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Her dark hair yet bright complexion filled me with a renewed sense of purpose and determination. It was as if I had been compelled to unwillingly take her here, so that we may have a child that could change the world. So you've spent nearly 20 years in this pit you call a lab, torturing and killing so that you can one day have vengeance for exiling yourself?" My question came in the tone of a provoked monster. I picked up a surgical knife and threw it at him. The moment it stuck into his side, he pulled it out, groaning in agony as he held a hand to stop the flow of blood. "Everything you've ever done has been nothing but hurting others," I said through clenched teeth. "Yet you claim your struggle requires vengeance?" My fury had tripled what it had been before, scaring both my demonic father and myself, if I'm being honest. This kind of rage was blinding, a threat of overwhelming hunger to give in to a more primal and savage nature. Each step I took left a smoldering footprint in the steel floor, signifying that our time here was near its hellish end. "This has all been for the benefit of the world," he tried to reason with me, but I stomped my foot and put a 6-inch deep hole in the ground, startling him. "You've talked of me taking the world by storm," I shouted, still trying to hold my wrath in check. "Your work has been nothing but vengeance. You've killed in the name of that cause, you sick worm." "I conceived you to change the world," he said to me in a quiet tone, holding a red hand over his wound. "Before the 20th century is over, they will wage war on your kind, and it will be up to you to ensure the superior race lives on." "What are you talking about?" I asked, raising an eyebrow as I took my final step towards him. He looked at me as if I were dumb. "Look at you," he said with a huff. "A mere boy, and you're able to destroy this lab and pick up a grown man and tear him apart piece by piece." His tone then grew serious. "Once the world and its leaders see what you and others like you can do, what you really are, they won't accept you. The world, as it is now, won't accept you, son." "I'm not your son!" I screamed, grabbing him by the throat. As I lifted him high in the air, I noticed the lousy excuse for a human being wasn't afraid. In fact, he was. "Why are you smiling?" I yelled at him, throwing his body across the room. He smashed into more shelves with empty vials, and the shattered glass littered the floor as well as his flesh. The icing on the cake was when a few lonely vials filled with different liquids crashed from the top shelf, shattering on his face. I was certain the world could hear his screams, and I felt no enjoyment or sense of vengeance as I watched his face melt away, resembling my mutilated soul. I took my time walking to him, allowing the chemicals to instill all the years of horrific pain he had caused to anyone, not only to me. "Hurts, doesn't it?" I asked with a blank face upon reaching him. Luckily for myself, he had crawled to his desk and pulled out what he had needed to cleanse his burns. I frowned as he attempted to pull himself up using his office chair, nearly collapsing back to the floor a few times. I was impressed when he finally pulled high enough to sit down and lean on the backrest, only showing one side of his face. Most of his brown hair was gone, and I couldn't help but see the irony, running a hand through my own gray hair. "Just look at you now, son," he said with great admiration as I picked up a familiar knife off the glass-covered floor. "You're powerful, smart, and even better, you're angry. You're everything this world won't be ready for." And then he grinned. "I'd say I've done a fine job with you." "Shut up," I muttered, throwing the knife so hard it was like a bullet in his chest racing through his heart. The blade shot out the back of the chair and zipped across the room, striking the cage where it stopped, pointing right out from one of the bars. There were no more words between him and I, our last few moments together spent with us staring into one another's eyes. Mine were filled with an empty sense of closure, while his were wide and poisoned with death. I continued glaring into his soul even after his eyes closed and he passed on, relieving me of more pain than I'd ever feel again. "So long," I murmured to his corpse and turned towards the only door I'd ever seen in this place. It was a common steel door, a theme that seemed popular in the construction of the laboratory. With a swift and effortless kick, I forced the door to tear from the thick hinges and slam into whatever lay on the other side. I stepped through into a hallway that resembled a metallic look and saw that it went either left or right. It didn't matter to me which direction I chose because they both led me away from this hell. I turned right on impulse and took slow yet anxious steps down the long, curving hallway. On my way, I soon saw other doors on both sides of the hallway, each about 10 feet from the previous and wide open, revealing similar labs to the one I knew. They were completely empty, which was good, until I reached one on the left that was closed. Did that mean... I grabbed the wheel-like handle of the door and turned it, followed by the instinctive pull. The door opened and I peered inside to find something I had been deep down expecting. "Brother, look!" The voice of a young boy said to another sitting beside him, although they weren't truly sitting with one another. They were actually sitting in 2 separate cages next to each other, made of the same electrified bars as mine had been. They both had light hair to match their skin, a good indicator that they were twins. These boys were only a few years younger than I was, yet their bodies were so muscular that a grown man would pee his pants if he caught sight of them. "Who are you?" I asked the 2 twins, and they shared an uncomfortable look for a second. "This isn't a trick, right?" one of them asked me, and I frowned. "I've been held captive here my entire life," I told them, looking to the ground for a moment. "For 15 years I've suspected I wasn't the only one." "Did Dr. Grey experiment on you too?" one of them asked me, and I sighed. "He was my father." "No way!" the other boy shrieked. "He killed our parents a few years ago and erased our names from our memory. He calls us by these stupid names." I looked above their cages and saw the accurately given names and smiled. Bulldozer and Wrecking Ball. "Well, it is certainly nice to meet you 2 boys." "What happened to Dr. Grey?" Bulldozer asked me in a nervous tone. "Does he know you?" "I've taken care of Dr. Grey," I assured them, taking steps to a work desk that resembled my father's. Bulldozer raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" "It means he killed him," his brother Wrecking Ball answered, as I studied the equipment on the desk, finding it all very similar to the stuff I saw him use in the other lab. "This should do it," I muttered, turning a silver dial counterclockwise until it stopped. The electricity in the bars immediately ceased and the boys' eyes grew wide. "What did you do?" they both asked me in a rush. "I've killed the power to your cages," I informed them, turning back towards the door. "You can smash out of your cages and free yourselves." "Wait!" one of them called out as I exited through the door back into the hallway. "Where are you going?" I didn't answer the boys, and said I was far too eager to leave that wretched place and start anew. It didn't take long for me to find my way out of such a simple facility, eventually finding that the hallway was just one big circle that met back with the other path. That led me to an exit that was just on the opposite side of where my prison had been. I couldn't help but stare at the door for several moments, temporarily frozen where I stood. Never had I dreamed of escape actually becoming a vivid reality. Was I really going to be ready for the world outside? As I stepped forward and grabbed hold of the door, I heard the shuffling of 2 boys behind me. But that didn't matter because they wouldn't harm me. I soon pushed the door outwards, bringing a massive beam of light, so bright that all 3 of us had to cover our eyes. "I haven't seen the sun in a long time," Bulldozer mentioned behind me, and I frowned. "I've never seen the sun," I commented back, taking my first step into a lush, green environment. We were on a hilltop, a great place to conceal the facility once I thought about it. There were trees for miles in every direction, indicating that we were in the middle of a large forest. "What do we do now?" Wrecking Ball posed the question, and Bulldozer shrugged. "I suppose we can go with... Wait, what is your name?" "Nathaniel," I grunted, deciding to see myself as a hunter from this day forward. "Orion. Call me Orion." "We can finally live normal lives," Bulldozer continued, smiling big as he and his brother engaged in joyous, excited talk. "No," I cut them off suddenly, my tone ice cold. "My own father tormented me because of who I was. He killed your parents because of who you were." My eyes were grim as I stared into the sun for the first time in my entire life. "This world will never accept us for what we are."